Welcome to Iraqi Dinar News, where you receive real and authentic updates about the Iraqi Dinar. If you want to stay informed with moment-by-moment developments, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Today's update touches on a developing geopolitical situation that could carry both political and economic implications for Iraq and, by extension, for those following the Iraqi Dinar. According to reports, there is expected blow back after Iraq's airspace was used in an attack on a neighboring country. Iraqi officials are reportedly not pleased that their airspace was involved in operations targeting a neighbor, and this issue may soon gain wider media attention. To understand what this means, we need to step back and examine Iraq's geopolitical position. Iraq sits at the center of a highly sensitive regional environment. It borders several key nations and often finds itself balancing complex relationships between regional powers and global actors. Any use of Iraqi territory or airspace in military operations immediately raises questions of sovereignty, neutrality, and diplomatic stability. From a political standpoint, airspace sovereignty is a serious matter. When a country's airspace is used in military operations, especially against a neighboring state, it can create diplomatic strain. Iraq's leadership has consistently emphasized the importance of maintaining sovereignty and avoiding being drawn into broader regional conflicts. Publicly, Iraqi officials often stress that their country should not serve as a staging ground for external confrontations. If Iraq feels that its airspace was used without its full consent or in a way that undermines its neutrality, we could see strong political statements, diplomatic complaints, or even parliamentary reactions. This kind of blowback might include internal debates within the Iraqi parliament, public criticism from political factions, and possible diplomatic communication with both the country that conducted the operation and the country that was targeted. Now let's examine how this connects to the Iraqi Dinar and Iraq's broader economic trajectory. The Iraqi Dinar is not only influenced by domestic economic reforms, oil production levels, and monetary policy decisions by the Central Bank of Iraq, but also by geopolitical stability. Stability is a key factor in investor confidence. When a country appears stable, sovereign, and diplomatically balanced, it sends a positive signal to foreign investors, international institutions, and trading partners. On the other hand, when regional tensions rise, markets tend to react cautiously. Even if Iraq is not directly engaged in conflict, being perceived as indirectly involved can affect risk assessments. International investors and multinational companies carefully monitor geopolitical risk when evaluating long-term projects in Iraq, especially in sectors like oil, infrastructure, banking, and telecommunications. In the short term, we are unlikely to see an immediate change in the official exchange rate of the Iraqi dinar solely because of this airspace issue. The exchange rate is managed policy-wise, and adjustments typically occur within broader monetary reform frameworks rather than in reaction to single events. The Central Bank of Iraq focuses on inflation control, foreign reserve stability, and exchange rate management through structured mechanisms. However, the perception of instability can influence parallel markets, investor sentiment, and capital flows. If headlines intensify and regional tensions escalate, we may see temporary pressure in unofficial currency markets or cautious behavior among traders. It is important to separate emotional reactions from structured monetary policy. The official rate is unlikely to shift quickly due to geopolitical headlines alone, but sentiment can always fluctuate. Another angle to consider is Iraq's ongoing effort to reposition itself as a neutral bridge between regional powers. In recent years, Iraqi leadership has attempted to maintain balanced relations with neighboring countries, including Iran, Turkey, Gulf states, and Western partners. Being seen as indirectly connected to an attack on a neighbor could complicate those diplomatic efforts. Diplomatic complications can slow economic agreements, energy partnerships, and cross-border trade negotiations. For example, Iraq relies heavily on energy cooperation, particularly electricity and gas imports, to stabilize domestic supply. If tensions rise with a neighbor due to perceived airspace involvement, there could be diplomatic consequences that ripple into economic agreements. For IQD followers, the key question is whether this situation threatens structural economic reform or monetary reform progress. At this stage, there is no evidence that it does. Iraq's broader reform agenda, banking modernization, digital payment expansion, anti-money laundering compliance, and integration with international financial systems, remains driven by internal policy goals and long-term economic strategy. That said, sustained regional instability can slow reform momentum. Governments facing heightened security concerns often prioritize political stability and security coordination over economic transformation. Parliamentary sessions may become focused on sovereignty issues, national security, and diplomatic positioning rather than economic legislation. In the short term, markets will likely watch for official Iraqi statements. If Baghdad issues strong condemnations or demands clarifications, this could signal internal political pressure. On the other hand, if the issue is handled quietly through diplomatic channels, the impact could remain limited and largely symbolic. In the medium term, what truly matters is whether this incident leads to broader escalation in the region. If the event becomes part of a larger cycle of retaliation, regional tensions could rise significantly. That would affect oil markets, security conditions, and investor confidence. Oil, of course, remains the backbone of Iraq's economy. Higher regional tensions sometimes push global oil prices upward due to supply concerns. Ironically, that can increase Iraq's revenue in the short term. However, increased oil revenue under unstable conditions is not necessarily positive if it comes alongside higher security risk and reduced foreign direct investment. Long-term economic health depends on diversification, stability, and confidence. Iraq has been working to attract investment into non-oil sectors. For these efforts to succeed, international companies must believe that Iraq is not at risk of becoming entangled in regional conflicts. It is also important to remember that Iraq has experienced similar situations in the past. Regional airspace issues and cross-border tensions are not entirely new in the Middle East context. What determines long-term impact is not the event itself, but how it is managed diplomatically. If Iraqi leadership responds firmly, but constructively, emphasizing sovereignty while avoiding escalation, it could actually reinforce Iraq's image as an independent and responsible state that could ultimately strengthen investor confidence in the long run. On the other hand, if domestic political factions use the incident to escalate rhetoric or deepen divisions, we could see internal political instability. Political fragmentation can delay budget approvals, reform legislation, and strategic economic initiatives. For those following the Iraqi Dinar specifically, the most important factor remains monetary policy discipline and foreign reserve stability. As long as Iraq maintains strong oil revenue inflows and stable reserves, the underlying support for the dinar remains intact from a macroeconomic perspective. Geopolitical events often create emotional reactions in online communities, especially in currency speculation spaces. It is crucial to remain grounded in economic fundamentals. Exchange rate policy is not typically adjusted based on single geopolitical incidents, unless they cause systemic economic disruption. At present, there is no indication of systemic disruption. Instead, this appears to be a diplomatic and sovereignty issue that may create political headlines, but does not automatically translate into monetary reform changes. Another dimension worth discussing is Iraq's relationship with international coalitions operating in the region. If foreign military operations intersect with Iraqi airspace, it can create complex legal and security discussions. Iraq must balance security cooperation with preserving national sovereignty. This balancing act is delicate but not new. In financial markets, perception often moves faster than policy. If international media amplifies the story, we may see temporary volatility in sentiment. However, investors typically differentiate between headline risk and structural economic risk. Unless the situation evolves into broader regional conflict, the structural outlook remains tied to oil revenue management, fiscal discipline, and reform progress. In the longer term, Iraq's economic transformation will depend on governance reforms, anti-corruption efforts, infrastructure development, and improved banking transparency. These structural pillars are far more influential on the dinar's trajectory than isolated geopolitical incidents. Short-term implication, heightened media attention, potential diplomatic friction, cautious investor sentiment, and possible volatility in parallel currency markets. Medium-term implication, dependent on whether tensions escalate or de-escalate through diplomatic channels. Long-term implication, minimal impact if contained, more significant consequences only if Iraq becomes directly entangled in sustained regional conflict. For now, the responsible approach for IQD followers is to monitor official statements from Iraqi authorities and watch for any concrete policy shifts from the central bank or the Ministry of Finance. Speculation without confirmed policy changes should always be treated cautiously. It is also important to recognize that Iraq has demonstrated resilience in navigating regional complexity. Despite years of political challenges, the country continues to operate its oil exports, manage its currency policy, and pursue economic reforms. In conclusion, while reports of blowback over the use of Iraqi airspace are serious from a sovereignty and diplomatic perspective, there is currently no evidence that this event alone will alter Iraq's monetary policy or trigger immediate changes to the Iraqi dinar's official exchange rate. The key variables remain stability, reform continuity, and disciplined fiscal and monetary management. As always, we will continue to monitor developments carefully and provide updates grounded in verified information and economic analysis rather than speculation. If you found this update helpful, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video so you can stay informed with responsible and factual Iraqi dinar news. Please remember that this content is provided for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice.